This is the Police Training HQ podcast. We are your headquarters for all things training and resources for Texas law enforcement. And welcome back to the Saturday edition, the third episode of our Police Training HQ podcast. Boss, happy Friday. Saturday.
Yeah, we are here on a weekend.
Let's get right down to it. We've got a great episode today. I hope everybody enjoyed our subject matter expertise episode. And today, to follow up the theme, we're going to talk about our core principles for Police Training HQ and why everybody loves us so much when we teach. You ready to brag about ourselves a little bit?
Sure, we can brag a little.
So very genuinely, for those that are listening to us and those that follow us, we appreciate it. When we started Police Training HQ, you and I sort of took these principles and then we had to say, hey, we need to make this concrete. So we adopted 3 core principles that you and I essentially teach from and with. And we start with autonomy, we follow up by relevance, and then practical application as foundations of law enforcement education.
Yeah, and I don't want them to sound like buzzwords. I know we struggled with that a little bit when we were talking about, but being able to share kind of this model, I think, requires a framework, and that's kind of setting a framework for us. Ultimately, we're looking to make learning that sticks, and I think those 3 things are a big part of what makes learning stick in the way that the student can retain it, not only for short-term testing, but an academy final or the licensing exam, or even carrying it into a career. That's sticky information in my view.
Yeah, we've spent some time, haven't we, refining this model, and then I guess based on some conversations we have to implement them, which is kind of a scary thing to do. And you can talk about different concepts and different learning techniques, but should you implement them and they don't work, it kind of all comes crashing down. But we know that's the opposite. We have real evidence. We have real cadets that use this model almost every day. And I just want to break them down for our listeners because, of course, like everything else, we want to set a new trend in law enforcement. But just like we said last time, it's not meant to offend. It's only meant to enhance the training environment. We're going to mention things like an older model or old school model, or, as we mentioned earlier, the Aristotle model. That's not to point out instructors or to indict our profession. Simply, we know that that's not as effective.
Well, I think it's time to step away from trial and error in police training and be more focused on what works and what we know works, what science tells us works. I like to use an analogy. I guess when everything on earth could eat us and we were running toward the cave, making the decision, do we turn right or do we turn left? If we made the wrong decision, we got ate. But over time, we've been able to overcome a lot of those things, but at a huge cost, because there was a lot of trial and error and lives lost along the way, figuring out maybe I should zig and zag before I dive toward the cave to save myself from the big critter that was trying to eat me. But to continue a trial and error approach toward police training, which is, and I think we do that a lot. We see that a lot, as opposed to why don't we just adopt what works? And that's another reason that we kind of distilled it down to these three sort of core principles. I guess that would be the correct word. And then, as we said earlier, in a way to share them with others, because we're not trying to keep this to ourselves. It's that's part of building training models that work, is that you can share those with others who have the same passion to improve what we're doing.
Absolutely. Well, and to tell a story, one of our listeners, Sergeant Foster from Weatherford College Police Department, rang me up, and she had a great crisis intervention class. And part of the things that we discussed for her training was, how do you take that much information and keep your students kind of intentionally focused through a training that is check the box, if we're being honest, but has some amazing information to be shared. And we sort of talked through it, and we came to this idea where I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to go back to what we do. And we introduced tabletop scenarios, or in other words, our first sort of principle, which is autonomy. I think if we're talking about the academy...
Well, can you define autonomy, or is it more of something that you have to explain?
Yeah, I guess it's putting the learners in their own driver's seat.
I like that. I think that's a great analogy.
Having a little bit of control over their learning environment. I mean, they come to the academy or to training with experience, even if it's a minimal amount. And I'm going to shamelessly introduce one of our products that we base this off of later, but they come and for the most part, they want to share their own experience. They want to have some ownership in addition to their own experience over their own experience. And so, like, based on our SME topic, kind of building off of that, I mean, an SME should recognize that and say, all right, well, they have some experience, and why am I here just to preach? Let's have them take control of some of their own. Like, for instance, if you're putting autonomy in play, instead of just reading a penal code statute to them, or instead of preaching off of a PowerPoint, why can't they find it themselves? For instance, adults can read.
Can.
Yeah, I mean, can adults read?
Certainly.
If they come to your academy, they're probably required to be able to do some reading, right?
You would think.
You would think.
You would
I mean,
think, yeah.
I mean, I'm from East Texas. I'm not going to comment, but yeah, there has to be a little bit. And frankly, what we're trying to shift from is when adults, I think, feel most relaxed is when they have some control, like I said earlier, specifically when they engage with content.
Can I pause you for a second, though?
I can't. No,
So,
you can.
so you're saying that as the instructor, then I've got to give up some control.
You have to surrender some control, yes.
Wow, how do you think people are going to take that message?
I'm not sure.
Do we love our control in the classroom? Is that a big part of what motivates some people to say, I want to teach in an academy? I can't imagine it's all altruistic for folks. Certainly, I think most people want to be paid for what they're doing. But to give up control seems like we're asking a lot of a bunch of us. We are in the law enforcement profession, so this is tongue in cheek. I 100% agree with you that we have to give some of that control up to the learner, or a lot of that control up to the learner, and maybe take a different position.
Yeah, and I guess to answer that question, quite frankly, I guess it depends. We're going to shout Roger Turner out again and say, it depends. What do you see your role is as an instructor? Is it a dog and pony show where you can show off your new suit and the knowledge you've taught 30 times? Or is it truly about sharing knowledge with a new generation or with a group of men and women for the benefit of their career?
But it takes, I think, more work on the part of the instructor to design that environment, to step away from the screen and step away from complete control to equipping the students with a way to sort of, I want to say learn on their own. There's clearly a role for the instructor to explain, to coach, to debrief. But I think we need to certainly recognize that adults can learn in so many different ways. A lot of that just modeling behaviors. Let me show you how to dissect a penal code statute and then turn it over to the students to start doing that for themselves. I think give them an example and let them start to run with it. I mean, I know you do that. I know you do that often in probably most every topic that we cover. So with measurable success.
Absolutely. Well, not only that, but it keeps them engaged. And we've mentioned Dr. Huberman's podcast a lot. This offsetting, forgetting, or you've
I think
sort
you
of
got a man crush on Dr. Huberman.
I think so too. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
That's okay.
Melissa, I'm sorry, but it is true. If you're going to, and I think you call it the forgetting curve too, in some of our classes, because there is a forgetting curve. But what if information becomes personal to you, right? I connect with it in a different way. Now, brain science sort of on the back burner here, but to speak out of both sides of my mouth, it's sort of at the forefront. We're just not going to give everything away in the next 30, 40 minutes, but if you give them that connection, control, or whatever you want to call it, I like to say connection, because control to a cop, it might make us feel like, we're in survival mode. We're losing control of our class. When in reality, do you see a time where, let's call it, a little bit of surrender and control can benefit a student and then connect them to knowledge where, let's be honest, outside of class is when retention happens. In class is great, and we set up foundations, but that autonomy we're talking about is not for now. It's for a month later, a week later, when they felt that personal connection with knowledge. And before we get into relevance, which I think is important, would you risk a little bit of control so that way, or if you knew hypothetically that they were going to continue to study because of that, would you surrender that control?
Yes, now I think kind of prior to what we see or what we're seeing, I would probably be just as hesitant as a lot of other folks. But it goes back to we've done a lot of that trial and error, and it's like the eyes have been open to something. No, it's not new. I mean, we've learned hands-on. And I like your personal connection sort of analogy is we know for certain that hands-on learning is what people prefer for the most part and probably take the most away from, but it's the hands-on doesn't necessarily mean you got to physically put your hands on whatever handcuffs or firearms. When we're talking topic-specific things, just practical application. You mentioned when we got started a tabletop exercise. Where would you park your car if you responded to a robbery in progress at QT? Show me on the board, or take these little cars, or whatever. There's a big connection there that I think that we overlook. I don't say we overlook it. There are certainly classes that have tabletop exercises, but why are we not doing that in most every topic that create that connection, and then turn them loose and let them try it out, work through it, gain that connection between the exercise and their brain, make that personal connection. Now they have an experience. It may not be the real world experience, but you only get to experience the real world in the real world. You know, you gain experience by actually experiencing. We share experiences as instructors. You know, we can share how we've handled a situation, or maybe even how we felt in a situation. But until you've stopped a car at 3 o'clock in the morning with your knees knocking because you don't know what's facing you on the other side of the window, you could describe that. And I think people can somewhat understand it, but the second you experience it, everything changes. Everything in your brain changes. The connection now becomes very real, and it's an experience that you draw from. We're just sort of accelerating a little bit of the experience through design in the classroom. How do I investigate an assault offense? Well, you got to know a little bit about the penal code. Maybe we start applying the penal code. Maybe we start creating scenarios where the student starts asking the right questions they would to gain the report information they would need to make a decision, whether that be, do I have a crime? Do I have the authority to make an arrest? Everything, I'll safely say everything, can be designed to fit into a scenario model.
That's right. And for the most part, we also know that learning, or studying rather, is best done by testing yourself anyway. And so another example before we move on is, well, in our academy, we let our students design scenarios. And maybe it's a little bit of a sneaky way to say, maybe an illusion is a better way to say it, that they have control over their knowledge and they're going to build a scenario. And I actually have them run their own scenarios. But on the other end of it, we know that on the cognitive scale, the Bloom scale, we know if they're creating scenarios and they've taken that level of connection to knowledge, they're getting it. If they're able to actually write a decent scenario, for instance. Or in our classes, we have them do teach backs. They're quizzing themselves the whole time they're doing it. And if they don't feel that connection or that need or that 3 a.m. knee knocking, well, what would be the second best thing? It's like, well, make sure I have the information so when I do come across that, my brain has experienced it from multiple angles.
Absolutely.
And having them reflect on those things too. I'm struggling not to, again, sell our stuff, but we have reflections that we do because, again, you and I've taught these topics 30, 40 times a piece. We're trying to get them to do that to be personal with it, to take some intrinsic motivation, perhaps, to say, I really need this. And that kind of goes into relevance a little bit. It's like, all right, we've made the connection, but one of the ways that you do and I do is like taking your 3 a.m. scenario. I need to know this because it's going to apply to me. This is going to be you in X amount of months, for instance.
I have a question that just popped into my mind because you talk about, can we create an excitement toward learning regardless of the topic? And I'm going to go back to what you said a little bit ago before we kind of went online with this, is someone saying that asset forfeiture was the best class they had taken.
Yep.
Now, I don't know that the topic of asset forfeiture would certainly be my most favorite topic, but I think it was the way that you probably put that in play in the classroom. Why did they like the topic so much?
Well, I believe it's because I gave them ownership. I told them, like I do many classes, you've been there, y'all can read as a joke. It's kind of a way that I break the ice, but y'all can read, I assume. Cool. Well, you've got your material here. And since I've done actual asset forfeiture cases before, and since was part of our coordination team at the DA's office, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it back on y'all. It's your turn to teach me. And I give them a scenario. And I think what happens is they go from sitting down and kind of having to be a a bucket, and without regard of whether that information is solidified in any way, to filling up each other's buckets, if that makes sense. And one of the best compliments of that day was, "Oh my God, class went by really fast." That turned into, okay, at the end of it, their reward for doing this or taking autonomy was, not only do I know it, but I'm able to teach it back. And in some real sense, they think, I could leave right now and go do an asset forfeiture. Now, whether that is the case without error, I don't know. But I know those 12 learning objectives that we're trying to teach them or cover with them, not only do they know it, but they were able to teach it back. And that's a level of mastery that I think most instructors would kill to achieve. Now, whether or not they continue to study that, that's the hope of these principles is, well, you have to study. You're going to have to continue to do that. And I made it relevant to their career.
Well, I mean, I've hired a lot of people for instructor positions, and I can't remember anybody telling me, oh, yeah, I'm dying to teach asset forfeiture. But
nerds need love too.
Yeah, that's true. But I can tell you that I've seen it taught countless times, and it is always death by PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
But with some creativity and turning it back for the students. I mean, you think about it, how do you sell this? There's a lot of officers who they want to go hunt elephants, and their elephant's going to be drugs. And when you can add the ability to take a bunch of things from a drug dealer, maybe get a little bit more motivation for the student to pay attention. And if you frame it that way and you let them work through it, it's like, you know, here's a traffic stop with 10 zillion pounds of methamphetamine.
Oh, yeah. Make it as good as you can.
And you know, let them tear into it and
yeah.
make a few mistakes along the way and sort of repoint them in the right direction. I can see how your approach to that is way more appetizing than clicking through a bunch of slides and at the end going, you got any questions? And then they're going to be afraid to ask questions because they're probably lost after about slide 2. Right. So anyway.
Well, and I don't think that this comes without some disadvantages, certainly. It can be a little chaotic. You know, sometimes class can kind of get off the rails, which is perhaps that surrendering of control a bit. And then inevitably one or two students may not be as involved as you'd like. And so it takes a lot of attention to make sure that you're walking the room and checking in and being present, I guess, and then also being prepared to teach that topic. So when you hear a mistake, being able to correct it so they're not creating training scars.
Right.
It does take a high level of preparation, and you have to be a subject matter expert. It's a great equalizer. That's probably why you see it done by PowerPoint. Is I can teach asset forfeiture certainly, but do you know it?
Right.
You know,
right.
Can you give examples or scenarios? And the other thing, when we look at topics in the academy, when we are talking about training, which I think it has to be mentioned that one of the things that we've identified is education, formal education, is very often passive, and we're active. That's a distinction that needs to be made. It's active experience, and then for real world application, it has to be tested. So a measurement. One of the things that we do also is we make sure that adults understand the relevancy behind information, whether it's a topic that represents a large amount of testing later on their exam, or whether it's, let's call it a smaller topic. I want to be very clear, we don't say that information is useless or not. We just say how it's relevant to their career.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information that gets sort of lost on the sidelines. It's kind of like one of those little connect the dots, the really big, complicated ones. But it's our job to help connect those dots. And it's like, how is CCP relevant to what you're going to do at a domestic? How is any of the topics the multiple topics, how do they potentially relate to an officer's duty in the field? So people kind of like to know relevance. I always think about in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, they talk about beginning with the end in mind. It's like this. Why aren't we painting a picture of like here's where we want to see you, and the things that we need you to be able to perform or know, and then we can back that up and creep along to get them there. I think relevance is a big part of our model. I think it's an important part of our model, and I think the adult learner appreciates that we're not trying to keep everything behind a curtain and magically at the end it comes open and we reveal it. It's like, let's give it to them along the way. I think that's super important.
Well, and I think one of the mistakes, this might be an unpopular thing to say, but I hear this repeated a lot. It's how my brain works. Instructors will, I don't want to say threaten, but perhaps it's, you need to listen to this because your safety is always in jeopardy, and so is your careers if not. And that certainly is relevant. But I'm not sure to what extent. I think adults appreciate not being BS'd about the whole thing. So to tell them, hey, this is not just about officer safety. This is also, for instance, in our academy, I bring in FTOs that I meet that I think represent some really good FTOs. And instead of saying this is about officer safety, for instance, which everything is, I'm not saying, but how about the relevance of, do you want to be successful on FTO? Here's something you need to know and be able to memorize, for instance. That's a new level to think about it. Or do you want to impress your FTO? That's my favorite thing to say. And in fact, one of our classes, I think it was week 9, I brought in 2 FTOs that are friends and had them examine a scenario, and they thought they were graduating. But based on our model, they were able to, I think, take the information, apply that personal connection from our autonomy segment, and they felt this motivation to want to perform well. Part of that is because, well, the relevance that we were discussing happened to be, well, this is, I think it was CCP or something, or penal code or whatever. This is what you're going to do every day. And not only that, but we're adding that you're going to be measured by your FTO. You should perhaps want to perform well there, and we saw it live in living color and then sort of fooled the FTO into believing, wow, they're ready to go, when really they haven't even gotten halfway there.
Can I put you on the spot for a second?
Please.
So an easy one, I think, to show relevance is you start talking about fitness and wellness or defensive tactics. That's an easy sell. So here's where I put you on the spot.
Okay.
So if I were to say, make a class memorize the law enforcement code of ethics, which is long and cumbersome to get through, and you're riding around in a patrol car and your FTO looks over at you and says, hey, can you recite the law enforcement code of ethics? And you spout that out of your mouth like nobody's business. And then he looks at you and goes, can you tell me the definition of probable cause? And you stumble and fumble around and can't do that. Do we sometimes focus relevance in the wrong directions?
Yeah, I feel all 18 of those wheels. But yes, I do. I think a lot of it is intentionality. Also prioritizing information.
So which are you saying is more important? I'm gonna hit you with we're gonna have a double trailer load here. Which is more important? Practical application or memorizing a code of ethics?
I mean, hostile work environment first and foremost, but
I think I'm HR too, so
that's true. Yeah. Well, I genuinely think, I mean, this might be super unpopular, but I think I think knowing probable cause is more important, actually, because it's more dynamic. It's a decision-making tool. And frankly, maybe my argument is if you need to know every square inch of that ethics, who vetted them, one, and two, is this really the job for you? And understanding that entire vetting process, how did you subvert that by being a super unethical person? I don't know. But I tell you where you're not vetted is in decision-making and in practical application. I mean, it's not something we can test to begin with without requisite. Do you agree? Can I put you on the spot? Or
Well, 100% agree. And there's base knowledge and skills that I think I like the concept of as FTO ready as we can make you, and an understanding or discussion about ethics is clearly an important part of an academy.
Clearly.
I think an investment in what is, excuse me, more practical or more necessary is important as well. Making that decision is where we're going to invest a lot of our energy and focus as an academy. What are the key things that they need to know when they get out of the academy day one with their FTO? Not only information, but some basic skills as well. I think that's something that we're responsible for as an academy, is to maybe we should be asking more. I don't know that. I guess if you have your own in-house academy, but should we be asking departments as, hey, what are you seeing in field training that needs improvement? Where are the areas that are lacking? I think that's maybe something that every academy should engage in all the time, because you'll hear a little feedback here and there, but we're not soliciting that normally. We're not asking, hey, how are our recruits doing throughout your program?
That's true. Well, and I mean, to your point, I mean, it kind of segues beautifully into our last little thing, which is practical application. That is our bread and butter for the most part, because it's a cyclical model as far as I can tell. You give them a scenario, you give them the relevance, and then spend the model. They take ownership of that scenario. They should perform. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I talked about today is, you and I do this basic instructor a lot. We do advanced instructor a lot. And we hear we should engage with students more. That's great. But we don't define it very often. What that means, is it just talking to them Socratically, telling a joke? I like to take the piss out of people in class just to keep people awake. That's not the engagement I think we're talking about. How about asking people to ask people to solve problems, or ask them hard questions in class, or work through decisions like you did with me just now. That practical, like you wanted me to make a practical decision on what I feel like is more important.
Under pressure too.
Under pressure. Yeah. True. Oh yeah. But I mean, we see this
copyright infringement there, but you didn't sound anywhere close to the band. So.
That's true. Yeah, no, probably sounded like a wolf. We do this a lot. I mean, we take these 7 core, and the way that we engage with students is not just asking them how they're doing a day.
7 core. You're talking about our key main areas.
That's correct? Right. 7 core topics in the academy that represent a little over 50% of their exams. Just so happens we've also understand that those are their FTO skills as well. We know that.
Right.
And for instance, like we teach search and seizure, and very often you'll say, hey, don't worry about it. I'm going to give you some memory aids, teach you these things. But the one thing that separates us is we're not just done, right? We understand that adults learn by doing. So maybe it's planning, but let's make this come alive. You do a search now, and you tell me why you're allowed to search, and is this a Carroll search or a Gantt search or whatever it is? And that's a lot of pressure. But how often do we hear complaints about that?
0. We have no complaints about that
Never.
because we're letting them be adults and they're getting to apply almost immediately. It's not like delayed gratification.
No.
It's like we're getting them to apply that information early and often. Is that kind of comes back to that learning model and retention. Early, often, spaced repetition, all the things that attack the brain in a way that the brain hangs on to the information or the skill. Practical application is clearly where it's at.
Oh yeah. Do you? And I'd be remiss not to mention. Does that not surrender some control too? Because you and I kind of co-authored a scenario article on our website about short form and long form scenarios. Sort of for this reason is scenarios don't always have to be an event. It can be short form or long form for the most part, i.e., tabletop versus actual role play, for instance. I mean, they're both practical application, though.
Yeah, you could a few minutes. You could have a scenario laid out for the students, or have them work through a scenario that doesn't take more than a few minutes. I'm glad you brought that up. I don't want it to come across as like you have to design this elaborate sort of process with manuals filled with hundreds and hundreds of scenarios. If you're a subject matter expert, honestly, you can come up with this stuff on the fly. And if you can't, are you really an expert in the topic? Because you could take your own real world experiences and turn them into a little short scenario that could be done in the classroom. And this isn't even, the hyper realistic with role players and fake blood and all that. It doesn't have to be. People have imaginations. You're just kind of framing up a situation for them and helping them sort of gain some very safe experience. Right? It's no harm, no foul here. Your first day in FTO could get you in a dangerous situation. Yeah. And so safety and your life truly are things of concern when we're doing it for real.
Yeah.
So the classroom scenario can be performed over and over again as well. It's like you can get lots and lots and lots of reps in your head or in a classroom, or really in a workbook. You can have a workbook full of scenarios.
Yeah.
Just describing a situation and in such a way that it can kind of put the student there. If we're talking about a domestic at an apartment complex, describe the apartment. You had to walk up some stairs. You're standing at the top of the stairs. You hear screaming on the other side of the door. What would be things that you would think about for your own safety? What would be some legal things when you open, or when they open the door? What are you going to do if you see two parties in the location? So they can work through it. It's not like Joe hits Sally. What crime do we have? It's like, okay, well, yeah, we can solve that.
Yeah.
People can start to answer that, but let's build in a more visual scenario. I think you hang on to that a lot better.
You do. And interesting.
And I'm rambling, but again,
no,
this is clearly an area that we're both very passionate about.
Absolutely. Well, I think it also, to your point earlier, it is lacking. I think it is lacking to no fault of our own, because it's not like we have a lot of time to certify instructors in this. There's not an FTO for instructors in our world, so you sort of get thrown out, and hopefully some of the concepts we discuss will help. But at the end of the day, you said something kind of making my brain ping, which is this critical decision making in a place where there's no harm, no foul. We say it in our academy. It's like, I can fix everything but a bullet. right? And a poorly timed joke. And then everything else can be fixed to a literal degree, giving the cadets a little bit of grace based on their experience or not. And then it builds this word that I think cops need is confidence. Practical application is about confidence, and the way I see it is it builds a plan. So they've encountered it, whether or not it to your point earlier, it's like the feeling you feel of that knee-knocking experience. Well, we're close, though. And we're building a plan because your body's not going to go where your mind hasn't explored before.
Absolutely not.
And
that's a very, very valid point.
And that's, again, the key differences in my view is training has to be active. I can't think of one learning objective in our academy, and there's thousands, for the cadet-specific training that's not practical in that case.
Agreed.
So to kind of wrap this thing up, because we're going to ramble on and on, this episode was dedicated to our three principles. Again, autonomy, relevance.
Die?
No.
Oh,
yeah,
dedicated.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, dedicated. What did I say? Something
Dedicated
unprofessional
to
again. Yeah. They're gone now. Yes. Yeah. No, they're forever engraved. I think about them often. And if you wanted it for a memory aid for our listeners, it's ARP, like ARP, Texas, autonomy, relevance, and practical application. Again, autonomy, put those students in charge of their their learning. Give them some connection to it. Give them some ownership. Relevance, how the heck does this apply to your job? And why does it matter? And then practical application, you just want to ensure that knowledge is applied, but not just memorized. Memory is, I think, the first poor mistake in forgetting. I mean, it's like, just memorize it, you're going to forget it, as far as I'm concerned.
I think that is one of the critical things that is left out of a lot of training is the application part of it.
I agree. And so much so, like the listeners to know that we've developed a product based on this. I don't know.
Here comes the sales pitch.
Here comes. I mean, yeah, we got to keep our lights burning. We've actually developed an academy support package that puts this beautifully into play. So if you're an academy director or even a student, reach out to us at info@policetraining.com.
PoliceTrainingHQ.
I'm sorry, info@policetraininghq.com. I told you I'm not professional.
Oh.
I'm trying, though. It's
You're
just
doing
trying.
a good job.
We just want to bring out better officers, and these workbooks, these academy support materials will keep your students engaged to the academy. It gives them some experience to come back to class with, and it frees up your instructors to be dynamic. Gives you time as an academy director to evaluate the way that you're delivering the academy, and we believe in that. So
the tests as well, especially for students. We have practice exams that cover pretty much every topic in the academy and some long-form practice exams to help folks get ready for the licensing exam. So as a student, if you're looking for that repetition in a topic area or just to kind of test yourself as what you know about a particular topic, those are available on our website, PoliceTrainingHQ.com. Again, we've got topic tests and we've got a 400-question practice test that will it'll put you through the paces. We'll kind of see what you know, how you're doing.
yeah.
So certainly take a look at those if you have interest.
Well, and if you're listening, you want to share it with your academy, instructors, training officers, and other cadets, please let us do the honor of helping you through your journey. Mike, anything else?
No, I think it's a good time to wrap this up.
Awesome. So stay sharp, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Take care. Be safe out there.